Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. The weekend is underway, and we are waking up with watches at the breakfast table today. Everything is for sale. All you see here, reach out to me for pricing, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. We are also looking for trades and sales to help us build our inventory. If you wish to sell us a watch, we pay cash, we pay fast, no upper limit on value paid, one watch or an entire collection. And again, to reach out for a sale, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com. A big show today, starting with a big piece. Breguet 5817 BA, 39 millimeters, yellow gold, full bracelet, extremely uncommon. The vast majority of these 5817 marine watches feature a combination of a stainless steel case and a rubber strap. This watch with the full matching gold bracelet is an extraordinarily luxurious and opulent take on Breguet's most beloved marine design. Yes, there was a new one for 2018. No, most collectors don't like it. This is the one they seek. Now, it is beautifully made. As you can see, the lugs are welded into place. The bracelet is fixed in place with screws and bars. No cheap spring bars here. The case is cold rolled and then hand finished to get this lovely coining pattern. And then the watch is remarkably thin in profile. You can also appreciate that the timepiece, which is 100 meters water resistant, has a dial also made of solid gold. It is cut on a rose lathe, real guilloche, by a hand-guided lathe, and so after it's cut and the patterns are laid down, it is then galvanized the silver white color you see here. So the dial base is in fact 18 karat and real reductive guilloche cut. Steel hands fired to a blue tone with little luminescent pearls, and there are some luminescent indices outboard of the applique fired blue Roman numerals. Double-digit date with a quick set. We'll pop open the bracelet. You can see that the rotor itself is also cut with a rose lathe to create this lovely Nautilus shell pattern. And the movement, which has a 65-hour power reserve, is a high horology hand-finished base that is related to the Frédéric Piguet 1150. So this is much like a Blancpain caliber, hand-finished, hand-adjusted, beautifully decorated in detail, and then that extravagant rotor. On the wrist, it's not too huge. It's a 39 millimeter watch, so it's not going to wear too big, though the lugs themselves do have a lot of presence across the wrist. It's still under 50 millimeters from lug to lug. If you're looking at the Royal Oak, the Overseas, or the Nautilus, you really need to consider this. Heck, if you're looking at the Odysseus from A Longo Un Zona, you should be considering this too. Breguet as a brand has the exact same kind of pedigree, the same quality of finishing, and the same forever reliability and expectation that parts and service will be available. So this watch belongs in that upper echelon of luxury sports watches, but because it is a Breguet, the price is going to be more approachable even in full gold. Now, speaking of Patek Philippe, we may as well speak of Patek Philippe sports watches. I was making comparisons to the Nautilus and the Aquanaut, and I'm happy to say I have both, but not a 5711 today, a 5712 1A full steel, 40 millimeters, exceptionally thin, despite the complications and the automatic winding, only 8.8 millimeters thick with the caliber 240 micro-rotor base. Pop the bracelet open, throw it on the wrist, super comfortable, very slim, 60 meters water resistant with a screw-down crown and thus surface swimmable. It is a very versatile piece, fully loomed. You can see there's a power reserve indicator, 48-hour power reserve, a Moonphase, a radial date, sub-seconds, and a lovely fade dial. Before fume dials were a thing, Patek Philippe was doing them on the Nautilus collection from 2006 onward. It is silver blued at center and almost navy blue, virtually black at its edge. The case is a complex construction. You can see from the bevels to the facets to the satination and the break between polish and satin. This is a thoroughly hand-finished watch of bracelet and of case and bezel. The movement, gorgeous, as you'd expect. Let's zoom a little closer, and you can see it is the caliber 240, giving you the open case back of a manual wind, the thin profile of a manual wind, but the convenience of an automatic. That's what you get with a micro-rotor. We'll turn it over. Maybe you can see a little bit of the mirrored anglage, which is the highlight of the finishing. We also have Côte de Genève black polished screws and engine turning on the base plate with satination on the wheels. Free-sprung silicone hairspring, extremely anti-magnetic, extremely accurate. The timepiece has a gyromax style balance that allows the watch to take and hold a precise regulation even in the face of bumps and concussions on the wrist. Hands as well as indices in white gold to resist tarnish and oxidation. Now, you've seen the 5167, the Patek Philippe Aquanaut Jumbo, many times, and since the model debuted in 2007, it's most frequently seen on a rubber strap. The Aquanaut was designed for a strap back in 1997 when the first model bowed. but at 40.8 millimeters in steel and only 8.5 millimeters thick, the look, which is broad, flat, and handsome, is completed by the addition of a factory bracelet, satin as well as polish. And you can see we have a higher grade of clasp than you'll get on a Nautilus, for example, as it is a double deployment with a trigger release system. Throw this watch on the wrist. It is powered by caliber 324 center rotor automatic, fully loomed automatic stainless steel, super slim. And the timepiece, 120 meters water resistant, so a true sports watch. You can see as thin as it is your dress watch, but it's also your sports watch. It's your never take it off all around watch. And as with the Nautilus, it has a fade to its dial, a gradient fade from sort of silver gray at its center to almost black at its edge. Note that it has both applique white gold numerals and luminescent plots outboard, so the lume shot of this watch is rather spectacular. Let's do a quick lume shot. As you can see, loomed indices and loomed numerals, it is a very bright watch. It's actually better loomed by far than a 5711. So on that count, more practical. The movement is high grade, and as you can see, Patek Philippe seal, Gyromax style free sprung balance, center rotor automatic winding. It does have the silicone hairspring. It is anti-magnetic, and these watches run from the factory no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per day per Patek. So a very handsome watch that wears well on a wrist, even as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. It's a good looker, very versatile, and you get what you pay for. Now, you also get what you pay for when you pay less. And for just under $8,000, you can get this lovely historical re-edition from Omega. The Seamaster 300, 39 millimeters, a reference to the original 1957 Seamaster 300 reference CK2913, the first Omega dive watch. This is known as the Seamaster 300 Trilogy, a limited edition of 3,557 pieces that came out in 2017 to mark 60 years of the Seamaster divers. Also that year honored were the Railmaster and the Speedmaster, as they all originated in 1957. This watch has the same 39 millimeter case. You can also see that the lugs are minimally beveled and squared off on their ends. We have a Naiad style crown with the little tri-spoke in the middle. Note the use of a vintage Omega logo on the crown, on the dial, as well as on the clasp. The watch, of course, 300 meters water resistant, but a dive watch by 1957 standards, so it has a bi-directional 120 click bezel. Though the Sapphire does have a Omega logo at center over the hands and a dramatic camber so that it does look just like a vintage plexiglass. It is in fact sapphire. We have a little bit of Fotina, and then we have Arabic numerals transferred at the quarters, the vintage Omega logo, the Seamaster script, and then broad arrow minute with broad arrow arrower, I should say, with Dauphine minutes hand, a Lancet style needle seconds hand inside the case, which features the antiquated terminology waterproof on the reverse side, a detail that I happen to adore. This watch, which is 14.3 millimeters thick, contains caliber 8806, 55-hour power reserve, anti-magnetic, really amagnetic silicone hairspring. It has a stop seconds function, a coaxial escape, and it is a chronometer. Of course, popping the clasp open, you can see a bit more of what this watch is all about. You can see it is a coaxial master chronometer. It is the latest standard, so not just meeting the 3159 ISO standards like the COSC, the METAS or master chronometer standard means the watch is tested as a fully cased up watch. Also for winding efficiency, power reserve, shock resistance, anti-magnetism, and water resistance. All of this as a cased watch. Remember, the COSC only tests bare movements, so this goes above and beyond the requirements of the COSC chronometer certification. It's nice and short across the wrist, just over 47 millimeters lug to lug, which means the watch wears really well on a smaller wrist down to 13.5 centimeters circumference. Taking a quick look at the clasp itself is notably not a vintage re-edition piece. As you can see, it features a push-button slider internally and then twin trigger release, so you do have that incremental adjustment built in, 9.6 millimeters of fine-tuning. The great rival to Omega, though we're not going model for model here, is Rolex, and this is Rolex's Patrician flagship. Reference 228238. This is the Day-Date 40. Now you can see the timepiece, 40 millimeters with black dial with baguette diamond dial. A lot to love, double quick set, 100 meters water resistant, 3-day power reserve. It goes 70 hours. 70 hours. We're 2 hours short of a 3-day power reserve, but we are practically there. Now, this timepiece is broad, flat, and comfortable. It is far shorter across the wrist than the Day-Date 2 that ran from 2008 to 2014. That watch has solid end links, which means it's 53 millimeters across the wrist. This is under 50 millimeters across the wrist because the end links of the President bracelet are pivoted. The President bracelet here on the Day-Date 40 features all ceramic-coated pins internally. So this process, which was pioneered on the platinum version of the Day-Date 2, prevents the individual links from wearing down their internal pins. Because of that ceramic coating, the pins never wear down, which kills dead that age-old problem of Rolex bracelet stretch over time. So you have the Rolex Chronergy escapement, which improves power reserve, improves chronometric precision, and Rolex takes the bare movement that has been COSC certified, cases it up, and then retests it in 6 positions, not 5 like the chronometer, but 6. And Rolex will not let the watch leave the factory if it isn't running -2 + 2 seconds per day or better. Again, 100 meters water resistant with an anti-magnetic hairspring and a shock resistant movement architecture. This is a very tough dress style watch. It's somewhere between a dress watch and a sports watch, with the yellow gold pushing it a little bit further towards the dress end of the spectrum. Lovely gold gilt style printing on the black lacquer dial, and then yellow gold bases for those baguette gems, which are absolutely gorgeous. This watch is simply a tragedy of riches. Absolutely gorgeous. But if you want something that's perhaps neither here nor there in terms of sports and dress watches, H. Moser Cie offers a timepiece that is difficult to categorize. Launched in 2019, 42 millimeters in stainless steel, this is the Heritage Tourbillon Funky Blue. It's 42 millimeters in steel, and you can see the characteristic Moser caseband. They always do something to differentiate their casebands. Here you can see it's a very shallow recess with a narrow coining, wire-style lugs, 1930s aviator style. It features a crown that is distinctly aviator inflected, a minimalist case that's rather simple and has almost the look of a pocket watch converted to a wristwatch, which wasn't far from the truth for a lot of those early aviation watches. You have a Moser Fumet dial that fades from bright blue at the center to navy blue, almost black at the edge, a white railroad track minutes ring, broadsword style hour and minute hands, very little printing. It says Moser Cie, and that is it. And then, of course, the star of the show is the Flying Tourbillon. But before we get to that, take note of the numerals. They are solid blocks of superluminova. So we're going to do a quick look at the mechanics, the movement, and the tourbillon. Then we're actually going to do a lume shot. You're going to be impressed by what you see here. So now you can see the tourbillon is a flying tourbillon. It has no upper bridge to obscure your view. It has 2 flat hairsprings and 2 stud holders, free sprung. They are opposed by 180 degrees, which means in a given position, when one wants to beat faster, the other, because it's in the exact opposite position with respect to gravity, will beat slower. And in any position, they will cancel each other out perfectly, which restores Abraham Louis Breguet's original intent for the tourbillon, which was to improve the precision and accuracy of the watch. Now, because it is a flying tourbillon and there's no upper bridge to block it, you can appreciate the hand-finished components of the tourbillon. Most of the movement here is a workmanlike sports watch caliber. It's a bidirectional winder with a 7-day power reserve, and it does feature the mainspring barrel in a golden chaton fixed by black polished screws, but this is mostly machine finished on the reverse side, with the tourbillon carriage and the tourbillon cage assembly being extensively hand finished. That's where you really get the craft art here. The remainder is the watchmaker's regulation of the caliber itself, and in spite of being a relatively power-intensive complication, it does have a 3-day power reserve, and it's not a big watch. You can see on my wrist, 16 centimeters in circumference. It's just over 11 millimeters thick. For an automatic flying tourbillon, that is very impressive, and it's not excessively broad across the wrist. We're going to do that lume shot now, which is very impressive, and I'll even get a little bit closer and show you some of those 3-dimensional blocks of luminova. I told you these numerals have been applied to the dial. They have height, width, and length. They are 3-dimensional blocks of superluminova. That's why this watch is absolutely outstanding in the dark. Sticking with our independence theme for a moment, here's our second of the night, and it's a timepiece that represents discontinued production from FP Journe. This is the 20th anniversary of the arrival of the first FP Journe automatic watch, the Octa Automatique Reserve. This is the second generation of that watch from the rose gold movement era, but it's a discontinued model as the Octa Automatique Reserve, and it is the discontinued 38mm case. We have a lovely combination of rose gold 38mm case and matte rose gold dial. Power reserve indicator, of course, 120 hours is the chronometric power reserve, during which it will keep the best time. It will in fact run to almost 7 days at 160 hours. Double-digit date, flush fit discs, technically impressive with a quick set mechanism. You can see the dial side polished bolts that have become a signature of FP Journe, and a polished stainless steel bezel for the time dial. Turning it all over, you can see this is Octa caliber 1300. 38mm case, but this is rose gold era movement. As a result, this watch is very hefty, gold inside and out. Nicely done. There's a guilloche cut to the rotor, which is 22 carats. The bridges and plates are 18 karat rose gold, making FP Journe one of the very few brands in the industry that actually makes and finishes full solid gold movements. It beats away at 21,600 vibrations per hour. It's adjusted in a chronometer style 5 positions, and then you can see it's free sprung for durability and for precise and enduring adjustment of the mechanism. There is a mirrored anglage on the edge of the bridge, the barley corn guilloche cut on the rotor, circular Côte de Genève on the bridges, and then you can see that the screw heads are black polished, and then there's engine turning on the base plate, and the individual train wheels have been satinated. The watch wears real easy. 45mm lug to lug is the approximate measurement, so the timepiece is suitable for a wrist as small as 13 centimeters in circumference, and you can see it's also very flat in spite of the power reserve and the size of the mainspring barrel. This is a watch that wears very well underneath the cuff. FP Journe, even today, making only about 900 watches a year. Back when this watch was made, far fewer, so this is an extraordinarily scarce piece and a very collectible FP Journe watch. Sticking with our indies here, we have MB&F and the legacy machine LM101, a model that launched back in 2014, becoming the first entirely in-house caliber MB&F product. The legacy machine is part of a series of watches that launched in 2011, basically asking a what-if question. What if an MB&F wristwatch had been designed in the year 1890, and that's exactly what you get here. But unlike the other legacy machines, which are huge, this one in a 40mm platinum case is extraordinarily wearable. It's one of 33 pieces made in platinum. You can see it has a spectacular anodized blue grained sunburst dial base underneath twin lacquered subdials. One is the power reserve, 45 hours. One gives you the time. You can see legacy machine engraved by hand onto the dial side. The balance bridge is vaulted and gorgeous. You can see it's been entirely specular finished, black polished all the way around. You see the bridge both satinated and beveled for the escapement, which sits underneath a balance wheel of 14mm diameter. You can see it's free sprung with an overcoil hairspring with recessed bolts inside its balance rim. This allows for very precise adjustment, very even timekeeping in any position thanks to the overcoil, and thanks to the free sprung architecture, a shock or bump on the wrist can't change the timing of your watch. Manual wind. This is a collaboration with Kari Voutilainen. So if you are not on Kari's wait list, good news. This movement was designed with his oversight of both bridge architecture and detail finishing. So you have spectacular solarization on the crown and ratchet wheel. You have a center wheel profile that's much like a traditional pocket watch. The individual spokes and interior circumference of the wheel, they have been beveled. And you can see that the bridges themselves are gorgeous with mile-wide luminous Côte de Genève, mile-wide anglage, including interior angles, the sharp cleft point where two bevels meet. You can also see golden chaton used to fix the pivot jewels, a nod to the pocket watch era. This is all Kari's styling and finish specification, his contribution to the product. Now the watch is spectacular on the wrist, and as I mentioned, a much more wearable legacy machine. The 101 is the most sought legacy machine because it wears well on the broadest range of wrists, and while it is not thin, you can see that most of its thickness is actually the sapphire, so cuffs will slide over the lip of the case. Taking one last look at the balance, You can see it beats very slow. It is enormous. And then it has a giant balance staff underneath. And because there is so much clearance between the base of the staff and the wheel, I'm going to do my best to focus in on this, but you can actually see the roller table by which the anchor impulses the balance staff. That is something you can almost never see on a mechanical movement, simply because it's difficult to get a view of it. Here you can really see the underlying mechanism and the heartbeat of the watch in action. That said, my favorite watch on the show today is probably going to be this guy right here, Romain Gauthier Logical 1, and this timepiece, 43 millimeters in white gold, represents the best of everything Romain Gauthier does, as well as the tradition of watchmaking in the Vallée du Joux, where he is based. Now, Gauthier is an engineer by trade. He went and got an MBA in the early 2000s, and his thesis for the MBA was the business plan for Romain Gauthier watches. He launched the HM Heure Minute in 2005, later the HMS, which added seconds, and in 2013, the watch that made him famous, the Logical 1. It won the GPHG Complication Prize that year, on the basis of its ingenuity and its fine finish. So let's start with fine finish. You have a Grand Faux enamel dial, two actually, superimposed over each other. You could see how many interior angles there are just on the half bridge for the balance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you continue to count. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 just on the dial side, just that I can see. Why is this important? Because that sharp meeting of two bevels is the single most difficult feat for a finisseur who creates these movements in detail. It is the single most difficult challenge for someone who finishes watch movements. You can also see the second greatest challenge, specular finishing or black polish, called palais noir. You can see it on the bridge between the two parts of the fusée mechanism, as well as on the middle portion of the balance cock. You can see there is a spectacular graining across the top of the balance cock anchoring platform, and then mirrored anglage that is literally 1 mile wide. You can also see that every individual link of the fusée has been black polished, and there are actually ruby pivot jewels inside the chain, 26 additional rubies just inside the chain alone. And when you turn the watch over, it gets even better with many, many more sharp interior angles. You get a better sense of just how broad that anglage is. You don't need a loop to appreciate it. Open barrel showing you the coil of the mainspring, and then a power reserve indicator giving you a sense of how much of the 46-hour power reserve remains intact. And you could really see the beveling here. It is absolutely world class, as good as Grubel Forsey, as good as Chronometrie Fernand Berthoud. You could see on the dial side the fusée and chain. The calling card of this watch, along with a 9 o'clock trigger, this trigger at 9 o'clock allows me to wind the watch. So what you're looking at is the chain, like a bicycle, creates mechanical advantage for the barrel as the barrel discharges. So what happens here is you wind the chain over to the snail cam. We don't have a conical sloped fusée here. We have a single plane snail cam that keeps the chain in the same plane as it traverses from one side to the other. It doesn't twist up a conical surface like a standard fusée. As a result, this is an update of the ancient constant force device that is more efficient. And as the barrel discharges and loses its mainspring torque, the relative diameter, or I should say relative radius, that the chain is pulling becomes broader and broader until, like a lever, the broadest possible lever arm is employed to create as much torque as possible to maintain constant force to the escapement, even as the barrel is down to its last few hours of power reserve. As a result, the balance, which is free-sprung adjusted in 6 positions, it has constant amplitude for its full 46 hours of power reserve, allowing the adjustment to be made quite precisely. You can even see the wheel within a wheel design of Romain Gauthier wheels. Now, he makes his own wheels. He makes a lot in-house, only about 50 to 60 watches total per year, and he also supplies wheels for the high-end Chanel watches, such as the Monsieur de Chanel. And unofficially, Romain Gauthier does a lot of under-the-table engineering for the super high-end Chanel watches. So this is one of the most highly regarded manufacturers in the world, and with only 50 to 60 watches made per year, exclusivity is assured. This is one of my favorite versions of the Logical 1. There are very few of them made each year, and it should be noted this is the last year of the Logical 1. It's being discontinued, so before these watches start to do silly things like FP Journe on the market, it's probably best to get one on your wrist. Enjoy it now, and if the market changes, you don't have a care in the world. You're just going to enjoy it because it's all gravy from there. The case band is beautifully sculpted with media blasting, recesses, black polish, and elaborate contouring. Nothing about this watch is ordinary, orthodox. Nothing about this watch is insipid. Every detail is the best available. Let's talk a bit more about Breguet, a brand that just recently has reminded me how good it really is. So I'm doing my best to advocate for a brand that, frankly, Swatch Group doesn't seem to understand. They make some of the best stuff in the world, and it's great that Swatch gives them a blank check and just forgets about them, because the products that come out of Breguet do not seem to be driven by the corporate diktat to produce immediate or voluminous return, and no two watches embody that better than what I have here, the Tradition 7057 and the 5717 Oromundi. Now let's talk about the 7057. This is 2 millimeters larger than the original 7027 that came out in 2005. It is the Tradition. It is the same movement. It's a little bit bigger at 40 millimeters, but it is not huge. This watch answered the question of what a modern-day ultra-luxury Breguet wristwatch should look like. How much of the pocket watch era should be internalized in the design of a wristwatch? Because Breguet is first and foremost famed for the work of Abraham Louis Breguet and his sons. So you want to capture as much of that as you can in the design without literally creating a pocket watch on the wrist. This watch brings all of the action to the dial side, and the cues are entirely of the pocket watch era. We have Breguet-style hands. We have a power reserve on both sides of the watch, with the power reserve mechanism visible on the reverse side. We have freehand engraving on the reverse side of the base plate. We have individual finger bridges for the drivetrain. The barrel gets pride of place right at the center of the movement, and then we have a guilloche cut dial that is, as before on the Marine, it is cut on a rose lathe, real hand guilloche, and it is a solid gold medallion. So it's black galvanized over the solid gold. 50-hour power reserve. You have that power reserve indicator. You have individual wheels that are shaped as they would have been on a pocket watch, and you have a lovely frosted grain, which I believe is achieved with a wire brush, and that's deposited across all the bridges and plates. But make no mistake, modern finish is present and correct. As I start to turn the watch, you can see the mirror anglage is a mile wide. All screws are black polished with chamfered slots and circumference. There is satination on the wheels, but there's also, if we can get really close, there is mirrored anglage within the wheels. On the interior of the spokes as well as the interior circumference, we have mirrored anglage even on the smallest wheels of the drivetrain, and sharp interior angles where they meet. So this is truly surpassing quality. We have the parachute shock protection system. This large steel assembly here is actually a spring for the balance staff. This was one of the first shock protection systems designed by Breguet for pocket watches, but still relevant on modern wristwatches. You could see it uses a Breguet overcoil hairspring so that it will beat concentrically, or the hairspring will breathe concentrically in every position with respect to gravity, allowing this watch to be 5-position adjusted like a chronometer, keeping even time in any position. Also note, modern day gold recessed bolt balance, free sprung and with stop seconds, in spite of the fact that the watch does not have a seconds hand. No detail overlooked, no individual feature has been spared. This is finishing as good as it gets, and I really can't overemphasize how much you get with a modern Breguet. That mirrored anglage is finished with gentian wood in the Vallée du Jeu, not far from Audemars Piguet and Philippe Dufour, Romain Gauthier, and Jaeger-LeCoultre. This is finishing in the finest Vallée du Jeu tradition. Even though Breguet has its roots in Paris, it is now very much Swiss. Not a big watch. 40 millimeters means it's a larger tradition, but it's not a big tradition. It is thin too. It is a dress watch, and like Breguet cases tend to be, extravagantly hand-finished with welded-on lug profiles and cold-rolled coining. So this is a spectacular way to get into a watch that is equal to, if not superior, to Vacheron, Patek, AP, and I'm even going to throw Lange in there, because the degree of what you can see on the dial side here is more than competitive. In fact, I would say it is superior to just about any Lange watch that exists. All the fun of this watch is on the dial side. Breguet, technical prowess in beautiful packages, and that's what you get with the 5717. Now, what you're looking at is a 43 millimeter platinum case, and it is a dual time watch with a sort of geographic complication. So I'm able to make changes to my reference city down at 6 o'clock, And I'm able to do this while changing the location of the hand. So this is very similar to, for example, the Longa 1 time zone or the Jaeger-LeCoultre geographic. You can also appreciate that the watch has a lovely bifurcated complication system. 2 separate times stored in mechanical memory, 1 set of hands, 2 different, note this, 2 different times given. And not only do you get an AM/PM distinction for those 2 different time zones, but if you look carefully, it's able to remember the time in 2 different days. So time zones that are currently experiencing 2 different days can actually be displayed. The system is very straightforward, allowing you to make changes using the crown down at 7 o'clock. You can change your hour as well as your reference city, push that back in, use the other crown. Now you can make changes to the date individually in both directions. Note, it has a bi-directional date quick set, and then you have the ability to set conventionally if you so choose. Note that both the image of the man in the moon as well as the cap over it, this is an AM/PM indicator, that's what you're looking at, but that is all freehand engraved using a burin, a chisel, basically. There's also lacquering on the dial as well as black polishing of the land masses. You have the Eurasian landmass as well as Africa on this particular version of the dial, and as with the other Breguet watches we discussed, the dial is made of solid gold. Here we have the caliber, which is 77F0, entirely hand-finished with some incredibly ambitious finishing details like 2 interior angles. There are a lot of Geneva hallmark movements that don't feature even 1 interior angle, so you can appreciate those 2 featured on this caliber. Everything from the guilloche cut of the winding mass to the Côte de Genève to the black polishing of the screws, the engine turning on the base plate, super special. Silicon anti-magnetic hairspring, free sprung. There is a silicon escapement as well to reduce friction, and a superior 55-hour power reserve, so you're getting an impressive timekeeper inside this impressively finished and assembled K-style combination. Throw it on the wrist. Super impressive. Flat, broad, but wearable, even on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. You can better see from this angle that even if your wrist is my size, you're still going to wear this watch well, and it's not a thick watch, so it slides fairly easily underneath the cuff. It is fun to just change the time. There's nothing quite like this watch. It's almost like something Andreas Streller would design. 1 set of hands, 2 different time zones. We're going to the world of Richemont here, and 2 timepieces that represent good value and complications from IWC and Jaeger-LeCoultre, made in 250 pieces, 41 millimeters in rose gold with a 12-step hand-finished lacquered dial. This is the Portuguese Chronograph edition 150 years, the Jubilee. 250 pieces made with this lovely enamel-inspired lacquered dial back in 2018. It was the 2nd generation of the long-running Portuguese chronograph. The 1st generation was the 3714 that came out in 1997, and that was the best-selling Portuguese watch ever. So this watch is the successor to the bestseller, but with a couple of big upgrades. First, the dial, which is hand-finished in 12 steps of clear coats, white coats, and curing, and so that's not available on the standard 3716. What is on the standard 3716 is the movement you see here, 69355, 46-hour power reserve, 5-position adjusted column wheel with a vertical clutch, and this is an in-house chronograph caliber that replaces the caliber 79350 Valjoux 7750 on the previous Portuguese chronograph, so you're getting an in-house caliber. The Portuguese chrono has always been the most wearable Portuguese, short of the Klein Portuguese. This is a timepiece that you can wear on a male or female wrist. It's less than 48 millimeters from lug to lug and reasonably thin. In spite of its cantilevered bezel, it does fit underneath the shirt sleeve, and you can see that well. This is a timepiece that has a lot of character and versatility and wears beautifully on a large range of wrists. If you want a Portuguese, but you don't want to wear 42, 43, 44 millimeters, this is the way to go. The updated version of IWC's all-time best-selling iconic dress watch. Now, launched last year, this is a watch that folks have been waiting for a while. A triple calendar chronograph from Jaeger-LeCoultre that pays tribute to its triple calendar watches of the 40s and the 50s. The watch is, of course, the master complete calendar chronograph. So you have a complete calendar on the dial side, a Moonphase display. You have a vertical clutch column wheel in-house chronograph caliber, applied diamond polished rhodium coated dart style indices. It is a loomed dial, and you can see it uses a pulsation scale outboard. So if you take the pulse of a patient, you start the chronograph, you count 30 pulses, and you stop the chronograph when you get to 30. So if you stop the chronograph at 200, that means 200 beats per minute is the pulse rate. You need to calm that person down. The watch is nice and slim, only 12 millimeters thick, which means it's actually thinner than a Rolex Daytona, and that in spite of the fact that it has a calendar complication, a 65-hour power reserve, twin mainspring barrels, and it is automatic winding. In the past, it was not possible to see the JLC 750 series movements, but starting in 2018 with the Polaris collection, JLC decided you should be able to see this column wheel vertical clutch in-house automatic winding chronograph caliber. It's free sprung for durability. It's a unidirectional winder with ceramic bearings. You can see it's a nice combination of hand finishing and machine finishing, much like what you'd get on, for example, Audemars Piguet. And you can actually see the column wheel at work. It includes a full deployant clasp, and JLC recently has started using pull-tab spring bars so you can remove the strap from the case, but it gets even better as their deployant clasp has a push button underneath, so you can remove the buckle from the strap without tools, and you can remove the strap from the case without tools. So it's very versatile for those who like to swap straps at home. Throw the watch on the wrist, beautiful. Don't pay $30,000 for a steel Daytona. Get this. This is one of the best new JLC watches with one of the finest chronograph calibers on the market, now made better with the addition of the calendar module. The timepiece, of course, is beautifully sized with lovely tapered lugs, so I could recommend it for wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. And again, it is quite flat with a conical bezel, so at 12 millimeters thick, this is a watch you can wear with just about any tight sleeve. Incredibly, the A Lange und Söhne double split is not the last watch on today's show. I always save what I think is the most interesting watch for last, and while you could easily make the case that Romain Gauthier steals the show here, certainly for me, I'm going to give you guys a chance to decide, so let me know in the comments, which watch do you think is the ultimate? I think the most interesting watch is about to come on, and I think the most technically sophisticated watch is on your screen right now. This watch, 43.2 millimeters, was made from 2004 to 2011, the double split, the first ever chronograph that allows you to split both minutes and seconds. And you can see there's a set of coaxial minute hands on the minute register and coaxial seconds hands. So this is a split-second chronograph that allows you to split both the minutes and the seconds. So you might time two intervals, one of which ends after 11 minutes and 37 seconds, and the other of which ends after 27 minutes and 23 seconds. And the watch will display both intervals correctly on one dial. Now, it is also a flyback chronograph, which means you can reset it and restart it with a single push of the reset trigger. It is also a power reserve. You can see the power reserve scale up at 12 o'clock, 38-hour manual wind power reserve. The dial features a tachymeter. It is loomed. The dial is made of sterling silver, so a solid block of silver that is then galvanized black with white gold indices and Roman numerals. The timepiece is 42.3 millimeters. It looks bigger than it is, and you can see on my wrist, I could wear this watch. I wouldn't wear it on a wrist smaller than mine, but I could wear it and feel pretty good about it. If your wrist is 16 centimeters circumference or larger, this watch is for you. Taking a look at the caliber L0011, when the watch came out in 2004, it was a landmark piece because no one had ever done this. A chronograph that can split minutes and seconds. What it didn't shirk was traditional Lange finishing, and you could see two separate column wheels, and the split seconds and split minutes mechanism has a decoupler so that the seconds hand does not drag against the running seconds hand when you stop the split. So when you split the seconds, the stationary hand does not slow the whole movement down. That decoupler is a very high-end mechanism used by, for example, Lange and Patek Philippe. Everything that's going black as I twist the watch through the light is black polished stainless steel. You see both fired blue screws on this movement and black polished screws. Polished screws for adjusting the chronograph and the timing, and then blued screws for physical assembly. Freehand engraving on the balance cock, glasuta stripes across the bridges, and everything that has that lovely charismatic gold hue is nickel copper zinc, with the copper giving it its color, and old pocket watch material still used on Lange movements. You can also see there's a lot of satination across the steel components and golden chaton used for the pivot jewels on certain parts of the movement, another nod to the way pocket watches were made in East Germany before collectivization of horology under the communists in the late 40s. So this is a nod to the pre-Iron Curtain a Lange und Söhne. Of course, the modern Lange company, reestablished by family scion Walter Lange in 1990. And you can see this watch has a feature rarely seen on Lange watches, a full deployant clasp, the better to avoid dropping it. You can see the timepiece has a remarkably distinct case, simple, strong, and germane to the Lange product line. What sets this watch apart is the dial side and the movement side. But you do not need to spend a fortune to have fun with watches. And this 50-piece stainless steel limited edition, this is the Habring by Messina Lab 02 from the Urban collection. The Urban Lab 02, the 2020 50-piece steel follow-up to the Habring Messina Lab 01 that was launched in late 2018 for the 2019 model year. William Messina is sort of the pen name within the collector community of a gentleman named William Rohr, who designs watches after many years collecting contemporary, independent, and vintage. And he has a very impressive and astute gauge of aesthetics. The dial is to die for, with vertical metallic satin graining at the center, as well as on a track that rings the hour band. And then there's a lovely concentric pattern on a sort of gold bronze base. It's a lovely soft satin gold coloration with applique radially arrayed Arabic numerals at the quarters, leaf-style hands, and a lovely slightly bent, that is roller bent, fired steel counterweighted lancet-style seconds hand. That seconds hand is rolled on a miniature pin so that you don't see distortion of the angle of the seconds hand when you view it from head on. You'll also note it is a jumping second. The watch is 10.5 millimeters thick, and it is only 38.5 millimeters in diameter in stainless steel. On the reverse side, we have the caliber A11MS, which is based on a Valjoux 7750 drivetrain, which I guess means it's very distantly based on the old Venus 188, but it is made entirely in-house with most of the components actually built in Austria, as Richard and Maria Habring, the folks behind Habring, they are both Austrian. And the watch right here is an original implementation of the deadbeat second, which is a distinctive feature and a house specialty at Habring of Austria, which only makes a couple of dozen watches a year. So we're talking real exclusivity before you even get into the Habring Messina collaborations. The Urban Lab 02 here is one of the most versatile and handsome watches to come out in recent years. The movement has two heartbeats, one at 8 beats per second and one at a single beat per second. And you can see up close the slipping pawl that activates the deadbeat second system on the dial side. Throw it on the wrist, super flat, super comfortable. The watch is about 46.5 millimeters from lug to lug, meaning any wrist can wear it well. One of my favorite features is the tiered pagoda-style bezel. You can see it's double stepped in from the case band, and that each inward step is super shallow, and that the bezel ultimately is perfectly flat on its top, meaning there are several different degrees and layers of nuance to this design that will endear it to you. So while the technical winner on the table was undoubtedly the double split, and my favorite watch is probably this Baroque Fusée from Romain Gauthier, perhaps the best watch overall is going to be this timepiece, the Urban Lab 02, for its sheer ingenuity in mechanics, pricing, design, and I do believe this will be an enduring design, as it has the finest features of mid-20th century dress watches baked into the case design as well as the dial. If you like what you see here, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.